So I was planning to come out here and just jump right into the presentation, but before I start, I actually just wanted to say a couple of things. We were having some discussions at about 7:45 this morning, talking about how this was going to be a long day for all parties involved, and wondering how many people were still going to be left in that last block of the day. Thank you guys for hanging out all day with us and staying here. And just one other thing I would like to say really quickly is there was a mention in somebody else's speech of that notion that the TEDx speakers were the beautiful people, and I would just like to kill that once and for all. Nobody wants to get older. Okay, I'll rephrase that. A lot of people after the age of 21 no longer really kind of want to get older. I mean, I remember when I was 10, 11, 12, and I kept wondering, why does getting older go so slow? But once I had those legal parts of age behind me, driving, voting, drinking, I started looking forward at the end of my life course with a certain amount of dread, and I know that many of us do. There's this situation taking place in our society and in our culture now where our population's age is increasing. What's going on is we're seeing more elderly people and we're seeing fewer people at the other end of that life course. And this is creating situations where our social institutions are having to deal with all kinds of new and emerging issues. We have questions in many different and diverse sectors of society, with pensions, healthcare, housing, or social welfare. They're all under increasing scrutiny as we're continually reminded that our aging population is putting more demands on them than can be sustained. So these are the kinds of issues that we need to deal with. And I'm going to argue that before we can properly address those issues and concerns, we need to understand, as a society, what our preconceived notions of aging are and what that entails. The mass media, we've heard that several times today. Well, they certainly transmit these impressions of elderly people that have helped to shape this ideology that we take forward into the rest of our lives. As a technology, television has stepped up in the last half century as the most pervasive cultural medium in history. But it's not just television. We have music, film, radio, the print media, the World Wide Web. They all serve to give us these images of aging that have helped to kind of create this ideology that we have about growing older and what that means. There is a wealth of research that has looked at the role of the mass media in their presentation of these images of aging. And what it shows us is that the elderly are almost always represented as frail or as dependent, senile, or non-productive members of society, and they place undue strain on our larger social system. So with images like this constantly bombarding us, it's extremely difficult to not then look at elderly people and think of them as a problem, or not look forward at growing older ourselves and having a certain sense of fear. We have these media portrayals that all fall in that same narrow kind of worldview, the narrow way of looking at one particular group of people. And they're all based in some of these popular societal myths that we have that tend to exaggerate or magnify what are smaller truths. And when we see these images, it's extremely difficult to not then conceive of the elderly as a problem. We see an entire group of people, and we're constantly told that they're socially irrelevant or that they're burdensome. And when we take those into our interactions with other people, it's really difficult not to conceive of it in that way. Popular culture conveys this ideal that it's youth that is desirable, and it is the ultimate goal to obtain.
For those who think young.
All right, check it. 3 aces. Nice, but nicer. Full house.
Ooh.
Nice.
Royal flush. I got nothing.
Oh, I was like, good gracious, ass bodacious, flirtatious.
What's going on? Get back to bed.
Feel young again. Centrum Silver.
So with these images, we can see how it potentially even further devalues our elder population by representing them with little or no social value. And with youth as the image of the social norm that we're all supposed to adhere to, it is extremely difficult not to think of aging and elderly people as a problem. And this is probably nowhere more obvious than in the copious amounts of advertising we have that promise to mask signs of aging or to put the entire process into arrest. All of this obviously available with the purchase of a consumer good. On primetime television, characters aged 65 years of age and older are an almost invisible population. A recent study concluded that of the primetime characters on network television in the United States, only 3% of them qualify as elderly. But recent figures from Statistics Canada tell us that 15.9% of the population is in fact 65 years of age or older. So there exists this serious disconnect between media's images of aging and the reality that most of us will experience in our lifetimes. That is not to say that there are not older people that are experiencing problems as they grow older, because there are. But when the only images that you see of older people in the media, when you see them at all, are all framed through that same negative lens, it is extremely difficult not to think of the elderly as a social problem or to think about growing older with some sense of fear. One of the ways that we can combat this is by creating stronger intergenerational links. Now, most people tend to have relatively positive impressions of their own grandparents, but then think negatively of those elders that they don't know. Meaningful time spent between our youth and our aged can help to break down some of these walls of fear and distrust. So, the Center for Education and Research at on Aging at the University of the Fraser Valley, of which I am a member, undertook a research project in Mission, BC in 2012. For just over 6 months, a group of 7 girls from a local elementary school would go to the Pleasant View Care Facility to participate in dance classes with the elders there. I also put together a group of students, and we went in and filmed the entire process. So it was the first Tuesday in February when the really excited and kind of nervous young ballerinas showed up at Pleasant View. They took in everything around them and made their way to the rec room to get ready. The chairs were already filling up with eager residents, and the girls began what became a very important Tuesday morning ritual. They would do this initial group introduction, and then their dance instructor, Miss Lee, would take them around the room, and they would greet each resident by name, one by one. This happened continually over the course of the entire project, and was really significant because it was only 2 or 3 weeks before the girls were calling the residents by name. And this broke down some of those walls. We saw those initial awkward moments replaced by smiles. And we saw smiles replaced by high fives. And we saw high fives ultimately replaced by hugs, as the bonds between these groups started to take seed. They were playing warm-up games and exercises together from the very first class, as both the ballerinas and the residents embraced this journey with open arms. We're a couple of years removed from this now, and it's amazing. I still can't not watch this footage and have the memories of everything. It was just absolutely incredible. So the girls, we interviewed them before these dance classes started. And we asked them, so what do you know about elderly people? And it was interesting in that most of them actually didn't have much of a relationship with older people. Only a couple of the girls even had grandparents that they ever saw. So we asked them, so what does it mean to be old? And what do you think that you're going to experience? The interesting thing is that by going into a place like Pleasant View, we are in fact dealing with some of the most infirmed elders. So the residents at Pleasant View were suffering from dementia. There were people that had significant mobility issues, were really at the very end of life. And the girls went in with these kind of preconceived ideas that they had. But right from the very beginning, they started to have these preconceived ideas about elderly people questioned, where they would continue to encounter all of these new things. So Rolly wants to get up and dance with you guys right now, and they would help him take off his oxygen and come out onto the dance floor. Or they would go over and grab Annie, who was suffering from dementia, and bring her onto the floor and dance with her. And it was in these moments, in these games, where you could really see that there was, evident joy in the faces of everybody that was involved. There were several moments that I would refer to as defining throughout the course of this project. We did collect 400 plus hours of footage of everything going through that and cataloging every second of it was clearly the worst part of the project. But the moments I'm going to talk about are the ones that kind of stick out. So I believe it was only the third week, and one of my documentary students with a camera on her shoulder went up to the girls as they were getting ready. So the first one there was Chelsea, and she's starting to get ready, and the student says to her, "So, Chelsea, are you excited to be missing school for this?" And she kind of looked at her quizzically, and she said, "But this is part of our school." And then she thought for a second, and she goes, "Well, I've always hated Tuesdays, and now Tuesday is my favorite day." We had Jean. Jean was paralyzed on one side of her body from a stroke. She had recently broken her leg and was now confined to a wheelchair. So when we were talking to Jean, she mentioned that she looks forward to this all week. She said, things aren't really good for me right now, but I just love it when the girls are here. It brightens my day. And then Paige. I'll be honest with you, I could have done 2 documentaries just about Paige. What an incredible kid that was. So we were about 4 weeks in. And again, one of the documentary students went up to her and said, "Hey, Paige, can you tell us what you're learning about the residents?" So I did ultimately produce a documentary video about this entire project, and I took the name of the documentary right from this moment. She stood there for a second, and then this big smile crept across her face, and she goes, "That they're not scary." So this continued over several months, and it was incredible to see these bonds and to see these girls embracing and changing, and they were having all of their preconceived ideas about aging challenged every step of the way. And they dealt with it. And the joy on the faces of the residents every Tuesday was just absolutely phenomenal. It is increasingly important, I believe, for us to have these intergenerational ties. We live in a society where everyone kind of fragments off into their own little technical connected world, and that's nothing against social media and all of those things, because that is a very valuable way for people to connect with each other. But if we lose those links to our past, if we don't understand the complexities of the worlds around us, then I believe that this disconnect that we have between our young and our old is only going to expand. Their instructor would lead them through all of these ballet poses and in such a way as that encouraged the residents to participate. And frankly, they didn't need encouragement. They were on board every step of the way. Now, at the end of this all, we did a dance recital where the girls and the residents had prepared for friends and family to come into the care facility, and they would perform this dance recital for them. They were all excited to demonstrate their hard work and to show off for their families. But at the same time, I don't think anybody wanted it to come, because that meant that their Tuesdays were over. At the end of all of this, the diversity in the resident population, the limited number of participants in the research study, meant that that original research focus that we had, looking at whether there were any physiological or cognitive benefits for the residents as a result of their participation, was in fact not able to quantify any benefits. But I will ask you this. How do you quantify joy? Thank you.